Hello and welcome to Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. My name is Ben and with me is
Jim.
And this week we watched Nadia, The Secret of the Blue Water.
I wondered if you'd bring that up, actually. But
to be fair, we watched Atlantis the Lost Empire. But I'm sure we'll get into it. There is, look, to be fair, I think fake news in that people think that this movie copied off a Japanese film called Nadia, The Secret of the Blue Water, or series, sorry, even. But yeah, we'll get to it. So I'll quickly smash out the facts and then we'll go into plot. Released 2001, directed by Gary Truesdale and Kirk Wise. Story by, animated films, just quickly. There's a lot of people who do every job.
Yes.
So bear with me. I'll go as fast as I can. Directed by Gary Truesdale.
Look, just even before you get into it, it's like there's so many people doing every job that any list you're about to read out is probably not right. Like, do you know what I mean?
Not complete. All right. Directed by Gary Truesdale, Kirk Wise. Story by Kirk Wise, Gary Truesdale, Bryce Zabel, Jackie Zabel, Tab Murphy, and even he admits there's nothing in the film by him, Joss Whedon. Starring Michael J. Fox, James Gardner, Cree Summer, Don Novello, Phil Morris, Claudia Christian, Jacqueline O'Durs, Florence Stanley, David Ogden Stiers, John Mahoney from Frasier, Jim Varney, Corey Burton, and Leonard Nimoy. Music by James Newton Howard. I think it's important we mention people who do music for animated films, just as in the future.
Particularly this one.
Yeah. 1984's June, The Fugitive, and Waterworld, just some of his many, many credits. Dude has been nominated for Academy Awards many times. Budget of between 90 and 120 million. It's from that weird period where like people were starting to kind of really clock in on budgets, but animated films kind of flew under the radar a bit with that sort of stuff. And had a global box office of 186 million. Yeah. All right, Jim. I know I had a really hard plot synopsis last podcast. I don't want you to feel the pressure with this super difficult plot synopsis.
Well, look, I have put some effort into this, so regardless of whether or not you think my mission brief was easy, I am going to dazzle you with what I've come up with. So here we go, synopsis for Atlantis the Lost Empire. Milo Thatch works as a linguist and cartographer at the Smithsonian Institution in 1914. After a failed attempt to convince the museum board members to fund a mission to discover the lost city of Atlantis, Milo is contacted by the mysterious millionaire Preston Whitmore, who agrees to fund and resource the expedition to find Atlantis if Milo agrees to come along and translate their map, which is also called the Shepherd's Journal. Milo is introduced to a diverse team of eccentric experts who form the Central Exploration Team, tasked with finding the lost city. The team embarks on a submarine journey guided by the Shepherd's Journal. Along the way, they encountered various challenges, including underwater battles and a giant leviathan creature. After navigating through a series of tunnels, the expedition reaches Atlantis. There they are greeted by Princess Kida, who explains the city's history and culture. Kida's father, the king, however, is skeptical of outsiders. It's revealed that the expedition leader, Commander Rourke, and his lieutenant, Helga Sinclair, plan to steal the city's powerful energy source, the heart of Atlantis, for their own profit. They betray Milo and the others, capturing Kida and the heart, which takes the form of a giant crystal. Milo and the remaining team members work together to rescue Kida and stop Rourke's plan. They confront Rourke and his mercenaries, leading to a thrilling battle in a dormant underground volcano near the city of Atlantis. In the end, Atlantis is saved and Kida becomes its new queen. Milo decides to stay in Atlantis to help the Atlanteans rebuild their civilization and preserve their culture.
Brilliant plot synopsis. You've raised the bar.
Thank you. I felt that was really good. Just going to say it, So if you're at home and you're like, man, that was a keeper.
Do you want my first impressions of this movie? So I have seen this movie before. I didn't remember large chunks of this movie. I obviously wasn't paying attention. This is a mediocre movie.
Aww.
It's not a bad movie. It's not a brilliant movie. There are things in it that are very cool, and there are things in it that are just like, all right. So, just getting it out of the way, I liked all the characters in this film. There are too many characters in this film. And I think that's really the main problem almost everywhere here, right? Like you get a 2-line story for every character to explain their motivations and who they are, and that's it. There's no development really. There's a small bit of development with the main crew when they choose Milo's side because he sad storied them. But yeah, you cut 2 of those people out, and I think you get a better film.
Yeah, look, I think that I love Atlantis the Lost Empire. So I would disagree with your analysis in the sense that I don't think it's mediocre. I think there's enough here to actually elevate this, well above the pack. However, at the same time, some of the things that you're talking about there, I think are pretty hard to argue with. So for instance, structurally, the film, due to the nature of its story, has a few issues which were always going to be very, very difficult to solve. So if we're sort of talking story straight up, let's talk a little bit about that. I guess the thing that I think, and maybe yes, maybe no, this is sort of perhaps what you're reacting to, is we have this problem where the first half of the movie is an expedition story, and then after that, we pivot to discovering this lost civilization. And really, it's at the halfway point that we introduce the main character of Princess Kira, who is then a major protagonist through to the end of the film. It doesn't leave an awful lot of time for that, because we've pivoted from this exploration story to now this discovery of the lost culture. And it does actually mean that neither of those stories actually gets served particularly well, which is kind of unfortunate ultimately.
It's a beautiful looking movie, and I'm sure you'll go into the technical reasons of that. I read words like anamorphic and 35 mil, and I just glazed over. But I'm sure you're going to come in with the knowledge here. There's one other thing I want to kind of talk about, and I haven't spoken about something like this in a while. There is a few little problematic things in this film, and it's just by the nature of being a kind of adventure film set in the time it's set. And it's real weird, like white dude comes and saves native culture. And it's done in a really lovely, innocent way, but like and no one's complaining in the film, but it's just a weird message of like, I have special powers, I know more about their culture than they do. I can definitely save them. And you're like, you can and you do, and I'm glad you did, but this could have been done a different way.
Yeah, I think if we look at the time period, because it's it's set in 1914, but that's not really what I'm referring to. I'm more referring to the fact that this is from 2001.
Yeah,
this is actually, for better or for worse, this is long before people were actually thinking about that sort of thing. What you're referring to is called the white savior narrative in film, and it functionally is now something that people are very much aware of and try and avoid, particularly when they're making their movies. Interestingly, one very popular recent film that completely got away with it was Avatar. And that's largely because the natives in that particular movie are so far removed from what we would sort of see in a modern day culture, with them being aliens and completely a constructed creature, that they kind of snuck that one through. But otherwise, you tend not to see that type of white savior narrative anymore. And look, that's something where I do think, I agree with you. We would not see that now, but ultimately it's a fairly minor part of the film, and it kind of goes part and parcel with something being done in 2001,
Also, in defense of the movie, it does kind of rebut it slightly in its own movie, in that it's like, hey, maybe we shouldn't rob a culture of its sacred treasure for money. Like it's very kind of anti-capitalism and colonialism at the same time. It's just like, and there's even like speeches of like the evil man justifying like, hey, like if the British Museum or all the museums gave back all the stuff they stole from other cultures, you'd have nothing. And the dude's like, yeah, but basically two wrongs don't make a right here. Like you're destroying a culture. So it does try to go with the whole like, hey, this isn't right. Like this is bad. But yeah, just the white savior thing. But Jim, tell me why this movie is special.
Look, I love this movie for a number of reasons. There's a few things, and look, I'll start with the technical stuff because you alluded to that a little bit with what you were talking about. So, I love some of the big swings of this movie, and a lot of them are technical swings. So, one of them is this is an adventure film, and adventure films are films that really used to be shot in what we call the anamorphic aspect ratio, which is also called scope or cinemascope. And what that means is that functionally, if you're watching a film and, if you're watching it on your home television set and you see really thick black bars at the top and the bottom of your screen, then depending on how thick the bars are, right, that is actually telling you that the aspect ratio that was actually shot in, because it's not designed to be watched on a 16 by 9, television. It's designed to be seen on a giant widescreen at a cinema, and this film, if you were to watch it now on your television set, it's going to have those thick black bars because they actually shot it, and it's weird because it's animation. They didn't really shoot it in this, but what they did was they mimicked the widescreen anamorphic aspect ratio of 2.39 to 1. So this is the aspect ratio that we know from things like Lawrence of Arabia, things like Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Like, this is the kind of big widescreen aspect ratio that you basically never saw in animated films because it was kind of a fake made up thing when you look at animation. That they're not actually, the true anamorphic process is whereby the camera that you're shooting with and the lens that you stick on it actually squeezes the image together, and then later when you project it, you pull the image back out again into this full widescreen picture. They're not actually doing any of that because it's animation. What they're basically doing is kind of cropping their frame to make it look kind of like it was anamorphic. But it's just, as a film nerd, this was something that I just love about this movie, that they're actually like, this was our inspiration, was these sort of older films that are renowned for this huge wide aspect ratio, and we weren't seeing it much in animation. It's coming back a little bit now because people are really playing with aspect ratios a lot, but that was the first thing that sort of excited me about it. And you might think, so what, the frame looks a little bit different, but the fact is, visually for us as as cinema goers, we're used to our adventure movies looking like this. And this is an animated adventure movie and it looks this way. So it creates that cool connection in your mind. The other thing is, this film was right on the edge of traditional animation going to 3D animation. And there is a ton of 3D animation in this film, and they have worked really hard to integrate 2D workflows and 3D workflows together. There's some shots in here that remain absolutely stunning and outstanding. The final shot of the film is, well, according to Disney, at least the films that Disney's ever done, that's the largest, pullback shot that they've ever done, and it was impossible before then because of the technological limitations. The shot of the submarine actually descending into the depths, the camera is doing an impossible for 2D animation 3D camera move because it's merging 2D and 3D animation together. And whatever they've done on the the remaster or the up-resing of this particular film, if you watch this one on a decent TV, it looks beautiful, even though it's well over 20 years old. So on a technical level, this film is really outstanding. So that's the kind of stuff that I certainly sort of geek out about. But then there's other stuff that
just before you kick into that,
yes.
sorry, there's a couple of quotes I read just basically in relation to what you were talking about. So when this was released, obviously it didn't perform anywhere near a Disney expected film to perform. And there is a quote by Kirk Wise when he was kind of interviewed later, and he's and he was asked about, hey, you're going up against Shrek, which is a 3D animated movie, and Lara Croft Tomb Raider was the other big one. And he's like, any traditional animator, including myself, can't help but feel a twinge. I think it always comes down to story and character in one form or another, and that will never be replaced. But just like photography didn't think it was, just like painting didn't think photography was going to replace it, but maybe I'm blind to it. So basically he's just saying like, hey, like, I think this is good enough without being a 3D film or an animated, like a digitally animated film. And he's just realizing that maybe like they should have taken the extra step in a certain circumstance, because the studio itself definitely blamed a lack of the teen audience getting attracted to the visual style of this film. Which is weird, right? Like, because it is stunningly beautiful, but it's almost like that they're saying, well, because it's not the new hotness, people aren't going to watch it.
Well, look, I think there's a lot of truth to that, but that's something which, again, if you look at things which to me are totally fascinating, hopefully not boring people to tears, but like this movie, you know, animated films take so long to produce, right? This film was coming at the end of what was called the Disney Renaissance, which was the period of big movie musicals that Disney was making all through the 1990s, and they were just having success after
Hunchback
success.
before this, right?
No, Tarzan was the end of the Renaissance, which was 1998. You know, the last two releases were Mulan and then Tarzan, and they both did very, very well. But Disney was basically looking for, okay, what's next? What's next? What can we sort of do next? The trick that they had here was they are going after a slightly older audience, and they're basically kind of doing an experiment to see if that audience will come with them, both as they age, but then also as they change genres and are no longer doing a movie musical. I think the 3D animation boom was certainly a factor because the youth market, particularly the teen market, was interested in that technology, you know, and that was really clear. Like Shrek was a great film when it came out, so that one notwithstanding, the fact is, if you look at the releases that were using 3D technology, good, bad, or ugly, they were making money at that time because audiences were interested in it, whereas they'd seen this traditional animation before. I think the big problem was simply that audiences didn't go. They didn't go to work out whether they liked this movie or not. They just didn't show up. They watched something else instead, which is kind of why it turns into one of those cult classics. Because when people do actually get around to watching it, maybe on DVD, maybe on streaming, maybe 10 years later, they go, hey, this is awesome, right? And then it becomes something where it's actually well regarded. But the problem was people just didn't show up. I think the other problem that they had was going after that youth market. Disney had all of these promotional tie-ins with places like McDonald's and, you know, other fast food chains, and they were all geared towards a child audience, and they kept those relationships going for a film like Atlantis, even though they were trying to skew older. So it became this kind of almost a little bit of confusion about who's the film for. Like, we're running Happy Meals off it, but we also want to capture teenagers. So what's the deal there? Like, you know, and then parents, of course, taking their kids along to see it may have been a little bit like, okay, well, it's not like crazy violent or anything, but maybe it's also not quite the movie musical level. So I'm a little bit struggling as to whether or not I should even take my kids to it. So they had all of those things kind of working against it, which actually have nothing to do with the movie. You know,
they really don't.
They're just contextual stuff that happened to be going on at the time. You know, and Disney actually basically tried this twice. Because of the lead time that you need for animated features, they didn't have much of a choice. They had two of these types of movies actually well into production, past the point of no return. So once Atlantis came out and didn't strike a chord with audiences at the box office, they then had to release Treasure Planet 2 years later, which was a very similar type of movie, which had all of the same kinds of problems up against it. And look, unfortunately, these two movies, both of which have since their release in years past been regarded as very good by you know, a proportion of critics and audiences.
I hear Treasure Planet stole from Muppet Treasure Island too. So.
But look, so they're both actually quite well regarded now, but at the time they just got smashed by this sort of context at the time. But look, the things that other things I love about the movie that I was sort of getting to as well was the fact that if you take, you know, Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, combine it with his Journey to the Center of the Earth, you know, then throw in a bit of Lost Horizon, you know, you end up with Atlantis the Lost Empire. Like, you know, and it's kind of just this, there's a deal of Indiana Jones in there as well. Like this movie is a love letter to adventure stories and adventure filmmaking as well. And I just think that is super cool. But again, is that going to hit with your average 12-year-old in 2001? Yeah, hard to say.
Well, I mean, the things you just brought up there, the whole Jules Verne adventure movie thing like that, I joked about it at the start, but there was, I think, mainly an online controversy that people thought this movie was partially plagiarized. And I think the answer is they both borrowed from Jules Verne. That's where you're similar. There is a coincidence in that they both talk about mystical gems, which isn't really a Jules Verne kind of thing. But yeah, it's all coincidence and having a third inspiration, right, between the two of them.
Can I mention as well, look, on the idea of crystals, like it's again not surprising. So the anime that you're referring to, and Atlantis the Lost Empire do both reference mystical crystals, but that's because, in my opinion, if you do any research on Atlantis, you're going to come across a gentleman by the name of Edgar Cayce. Are you familiar with Mr. Cayce?
I'm familiar with Edgar Cayce, yes.
Yeah. I thought that you would be, because you are a fan of, shall we call it, fringe theory with regard to these kinds
I want to clarify slightly. I'm a fan of picking on fringe theories, but continue.
So look, without getting too far into it, Edgar Cayce was an interesting gentleman who actually existed, and he,
he's real.
Yeah, his claim to fame, if you like, was his reported ability to enter a trance-like state and tell people, basically clairvoyant psychic readings.
He was a remote viewer and connector to past lives. So his whole deal, yeah.
So he says, and so his supporters say, and we're not really here to talk about that, but a big part of what he did talk about was Atlantis, and he was someone who really brought together this idea of Atlantis, his version of it at least, being powered by these crystals. And it's funny, if you, look at stories that refer to, Atlantis or the Atlantean mythology, even stuff like Dinotopia, which was also hitting in the 90s, they're also talking about crystals. And it's really because if you look at Atlantis and you start to research the lore and the history, you find Edgar Cayce and what he was on about. And, there's some fun stuff there from a narrative perspective if you're actually playing around with ideas of Atlantis.
Just quickly, there is an Australian original TV show that also plays with this idea that I know for a fact you watched, called Spellbinder. But yeah, look, okay. This leads us to a big question, Jim. Are you ready for it?
I'm ready.
Do you believe Atlantis was a real place?
I don't think so.
Ding, ding, ding! Give that man a prize.
I'm someone who, look, trust me, I wanted it to be a real place. Do you know what I mean?
Why would you not want it to be real? That's amazing if it was.
But the fact is, like, really, we're looking at some writings from Greek philosopher Plato as our main source, and ultimately it appears to be something that was mostly allegorical and symbolic.
It's an allegory for greed and reaching too close to the gods. It's like, hey, if you strive and you try to go beyond the gods, like a lot of Greek stuff was, you will be punished and buried. But yeah, okay, let's get back to movies. That's what we actually know about sometimes. So I want to bring up one of the actresses in this film, and her name is Cree Sumner. Or Summer.
Mm-hmm.
She has an amazing claim to fame. She was the first voice of Penny from Inspector Gadget.
Oh, really?
She's the voice of the princess, Kida, in this movie. She is also in a ridiculous amount of films. As if you ever look up a voice actor of any note, they have more like credits to their name than any actor could ever hope to. And she's kind of one of those. But yeah, I thought it was really cool when I was researching this. I'm like, I click on names, like, what did you do? And I'm like, oh, you did everything. Like, she's a voice in God of War, the video game, and like just a crazy amount of weird stuff.
So it's and the voice cast here is pretty amazing, really. I mean, we're sort of anchored by Michael J. Fox, playing Milo, and he does a great job. And there's like I think the voice work is great, but you'd expect that from a Disney production, particularly in the 90s, particularly at this level. So the if we had to sort of say, okay, what's wrong with it? Like, I think we do definitely end up talking about the film once they reach Atlantis. Once they reach Atlantis and then they go from there to the end of the movie, that's where we sort of start to introduce some problems. Not visually, mind you.
No.
Atlantis looks amazing
Pretty.
in the movie, but the film definitely slows down once the explorer team reaches Atlantis. We have to slow down because we've got to introduce Keto. We have to introduce the Atlantean culture, and it does kind of stop the momentum of the movie, and also basically prepares us to launch into our third act, which, ultimately, what's the film about? Well, it turns out it's about stealing from, a culture that is not your own, and then trying to profit off it. We've seen this story before so many times. So it then sort of just becomes about the execution. I think that the end sort of hot air balloon battle in the dormant volcano is pretty darn cool. But yeah, it's sort of just, I think the strength of the first half of the film almost lets down the second half of the film because we're kind of forced to do a certain kind of story and we already know where it's all heading, what do you think? You reckon you agree with that?
I have a habit in this modern age of streaming to think of how would this movie be structured if it was a series on Netflix? And it would easily be the first season would be them getting to Atlantis. You would stretch that out over multiple episodes, and the last thing would be them seeing Atlantis, right? And seeing the people. And you're like, end of season 1. Then season 2 would be all Atlantis. You'd have time to live in Atlantis, explore Atlantis, slowly uncover the mystery of, hey, these people are actually crooks, slowly uncover the mystery of Atlantis itself, and then you'd have this kind of wonderful resolution of, oh, I care about these people, I care about this crystal, they're stealing it, this is awful. Like, there's 2 seasons of television in this movie, and I think that's kind of what it suffers from. It suffers from us wanting more, right? It suffers from us wanting more information, more character, more action. And look, I'm going to throw it out there, more submarine. That is the most epic shot of a submarine that gets discarded in the next 3 minutes I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah. And if you wanted any kind of like, hey, was it really inspired by 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea?
Submarine.
Take a look at the sub, man.
And there's definitely nothing wrong with being inspired by 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and Journey to the Center of the Earth. Those things at this point are classic touchstones in fiction, right? A lot of films, even to these days, like the new Godzilla, King Kong movies that are out, they touch on center of the earth stuff, right? Like it's crazy the amount that it's permeated. And I always enjoy it because they are classic wonder-inducing thoughts, right? Yes, in the modern age, we know those things aren't possible. There is no center of the earth and that sort of stuff. It doesn't stop it being amazing and fun. And this movie is at its best when it's playing with those wondrous themes. It's when there's wonder to be found that the movie is fantastic. And you're right, when they find the wonder eventually and they're there, you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, well, it's also like if we were to get really niche, which, hey, why not? We can. This movie plays with 2 different subgenres of science fiction, one of which I'm going to be like, look, honestly, this is something where, because I'm going to go not just to one subgenre, I'm going to go into a subgenre. This movie's technically diesel punk for the first half of the film. Yep. If you're listening to this, Ben just like basically smacked his head against the computer because he's like, I don't like you for using the word diesel punk, but it's true, okay? Like, so it's diesel punk.
We can't just call it steampunk. It's specific, guys.
Yeah, I know. I kind of knew that at least you would take the place of the internet for just a second and just hate all over the fact that I used that. But it's true. Like diesel punk, particularly refers to, almost pre World War I and heading into World War One, aesthetics that spun out of steampunk, which came just before it. So, which does fit. It fits, man. It fits with this film,
Look, it is alternate history, right? They're pushing that World War One technology to its extreme. Like,
yeah,
if the people in that era imagined what they could do with this technology, this is what they'd imagine. They'd imagine launching planes off the back of a ute. They'd imagine a rocket-powered hot air balloon. They'd imagine all those things. And as I said, the wonder and the imagination in this film is never at fault. It's amazing.
it's just tricky though, because we sort of moved from that sort of diesel punk aesthetic in the first half to what is more an out and out mystical science fiction aesthetic for the second half, where we've got hover cars and we've got laser beams and that
they're
kind
hover
of
fish.
Yeah, well, you say potato. And I prefer I don't mind either of them. Like I said, visually gorgeous movie, but I do prefer the first aesthetic compared to the second if we had to choose, So I am a little bit sad that you didn't like this movie more, Ben. I
Look,
hope that
as I said, like, I didn't dislike this movie. I did find my attention wandering a little bit in parts, which is the sign of, hey, this hasn't obviously hooked me. But then I was brought back when different things happened. So for example, certain characters when they're on screen, I would watch. Like the characters, I just wanted more character. I wanted to know more. Like I loved Vinny, the demolitions dude. That dude is a top-notch character in this film. And if he wasn't so crowded and he had more room to breathe, like, let's face it, Mole is a useless character in this movie. Mole could have been in Vinny's skill set.
It's tricky, actually, because you kind of bring up something about the film which, is worth noting, which is like this sort of secondary tier of characters introduce a lot of what we would call a slapstick children's aesthetic to the movie. And it is a little bit of a question of, is that actually a good thing for this movie or is it not? Because there's that difference between, an anime versus, or actually that's not even a fair assumption, but basically in the 1990s, like what people were talking about were cartoons, and cartoons having a certain slapstick kiddie kind of aesthetic, which this movie is...
cartoons were the only ones that could do it. Like
it's tricky, yeah. It's sort of that Looney Tunes style of physics, and it's a little bit sort of like this movie on the one hand is trying to rally against that and say, hey, we're a little bit just a fraction more mature, and on the other hand, they're giving us characters like Mole who are purely in that silly slapstick kind of place. So it's a little bit of a.
I honestly think, as far as characters go, you could get away with having the bad guy. You could get away with having the doctor, the mechanic, and Vinny as like your kind of little core thing, and the commander's second in command. But look, again, I feel like I'm dwelling too much on what I didn't like in this movie. I did watch it all the way through. I would recommend it to a lot of different people who I would know who would like this style of movie. Like if you're out there for just like a fun, adventurous ride with some fun stakes, and you kind of just want to, it's a comfort movie, I think, for a lot of people too. I think this nails that vibe. I got a couple of quick facts. Do you have anything else you want to go on about?
Oh, look, I think I've covered most of it now. Just to say that I think the score is incredible in this movie. Like, it really behaves like a big budget feature film live action score, and James Newton Howard, you listed off a bunch of stuff that he's famous for, but, even just after this, he went and collaborated on Batman Begins and then, King Kong, Peter Jackson's King Kong, that is. And both of those movies just have this beautiful, massive sounding score, and I think that this film is also a place where he shines with that kind of work. So I just wanted to mention that as well.
It's definitely a top tier part of this movie. Like the score and the music choices are fantastic. So my two quick facts, and one of them is like a fact, and the other one is I just think we need to hammer home a certain point. Making these movies is incredibly time consuming, and so much effort goes into them. So here's a stat to back that up. 350 different animators worked on this film across all three at the time of Disney's animation studios across the world. Like, the sheer amount of humanity that went into making this movie is mind-boggling. Like, a lot of people go, yeah, a lot of people work on movies, but if you take into consideration that that's just the animators on this film, it's not the editors, the production people, it's not the stills people, it's not any of those people, just the animators. A sheer amount of humanity went into making something that is ultimately a beautiful piece of art visually. The second thing I want to do is, we mentioned it briefly, but Michael J. Fox is the lead of this film. But at this point in time, he actually had 2 scripts in his hand for animated films, and he had to choose which one he was going to do. Eventually, his kids picked this one for him. Do you know what the other film he could have been the lead of was?
I'm not sure, no.
Titan AE.
Actually, I did know that. What am I talking about? You're right. Then now, as soon as you say it, I'm like, bam, there you go. So Titan AE was another one of these 2D films which falls into this exact same category of, a major studio. Now I've got to remember which studio. I think that was DreamWorks, but I could be wrong there. But it was trying to see if this 2D aesthetic would actually push to a slightly older audience. So
I just thought, it was really fascinating that, like, these 2 films, 20th Century Fox did Titan AE.
Right, sure.
I just thought it was interesting that these 2 films that share this kind of a mission in a way of, hey, let's try and take animation a bit further. Let's try and take these stories to a slightly older audience. And yeah, he could have been in both. So, look, Atlantis: Lost Empire, fantastic movie, just not a Ben movie.
Well, it was definitely a Jim movie. So hopefully you didn't mind it being inflicted on you. No. Of all the films we've watched so far on this cinematic journey, this is the only one that I actually watched twice in the week that we were actually sort of scheduled to do this. And
we had a short week.
Yeah. So, I wanted to watch it, and I, realized how much I sort of loved it when I did that rewatch. So, so thank you for voyaging with me. Do you want to tell me where we're voyaging next?
So, a few things about the movie I'm about to choose. 1, I have not seen the movie. 2, that'll sound bonkers to you when I tell you what the movie is. 3, I think this movie is a fantastic talking point and talking piece for a lot of different parts of the movie industry and cinema in general. And 4, this movie has 2 sequels that have nothing to do with the original. Also, right. This is a big departure in genre for us.
Okay. I don't know if I'm going to enjoy this, but I don't think I can wait any further. Hit me.
We are going to watch Cloverfield.
Oh, you haven't seen it?
Haven't seen it.
I actually really like Cloverfield, so good choice. I knew
you'd seen it. So next podcast we'll be talking about Cloverfield. If you somehow don't know what it has been widely described as maybe the best found footage film of all time. I think that may be a big call. But yeah, so next podcast we will be talking about Cloverfield. Now,
and I guess we need to be careful there as well, because we're talking about the original Cloverfield. We're not talking about 10 Cloverfield Lane or the Cloverfield Paradox. So if you are someone who is journeying with us and watching these things as we do, we're looking at just Cloverfield.
Just Cloverfield, which is why I brought up it has sequels is a strong word. It has movies that exist in the same universe that really have nothing to do with it. All right. So if you are watching this or listening to this, please like, comment, or subscribe on the platform of your choice. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts at Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. You can also find us on Instagram, Jim and Ben on Instagram. I put up movie posters. I talk about the movies we've watched I usually ask a few little questions. I'm getting some people kind of replying, which is nice. But yeah, thank you so much for inflicting Atlantis, the Lost Empire upon me, Jim. And I'm glad that you're excited that I've inflicted the movie Cloverfield on you. See and talk to everybody next time.
Bye-bye.
Peace.